Thank you. Thank you. So welcome to, this is part of the community track in most of our conferences. The Apache Way is something we talk about a lot, and I thought it's such a big concept that I think the description here is a lot more relevant for what we want to try and express, which is this is an effective way to manage your open source projects, something the ASF has pioneered. So what really is the Apache Way? I just said it's pretty complex and there are a lot of topics. Well, I would put to you that it's a set of behaviors, the way we behave, and practices that we work with together, developed at the Apache Software Foundation, and designed, the purpose really, is to promote long-lived projects, community-based projects, of course, by focusing on stable governance, how we decide things, and encouraging and drawing in new contributors. So these are a little bit of the behind, like the why we have all these sort of things you might not have thought of before, or we ask you to do votes a certain way. It's because we're looking for long-lived projects. And the way you do that is you get new people to contribute. And since we're at ApacheCon, I can say these behaviors are really required, expected of all Apache projects. Now, a number of other foundations have adopted many of our practices, and they sort of look to these as guidelines that they either do or don't use, but we expect that all projects will be working this way. So how do we get here, and how is this important to our project? So a lot of traditional Apache Way projects, a lot of traditional Apache Way talks like this, we've been giving them at almost every ApacheCon, talk about how the Foundation was created as a corporation to provide a legal shield, the history of how we built PMCs and how we have the projects as separate, and of course the history of how we've developed these behaviors, because of course the Apache Way has changed over time. But how important is all of that history from 20 years ago now, more than 20 years ago now, today? Is that what you're here for? A lot of that is from Lars's talk yesterday and from our website. I'm not going to do that. What I want to do is talk about the simple things that you can do to better work within Apache projects. The actual behaviors and techniques you can use to be effective, and if you're joining the ASF or if you're already in an Apache project, to work with our projects well. And I'll go into a little bit of the whys behind the behaviors, but some of those are so detailed, and there are many, what if this, what if that, what if that, what we've done in each of those cases, and here's how we made that decision. I'll do some of those along the way, but a lot of that, it's a much bigger process than we have time for, unfortunately, here today in Berlin. So we also know that open source is participation. Right? It's open source, we're all sharing, we're all working together. So I have a menu here of 5 kinds of behaviors that are important to the Apache Way. So community over code, which we all talk about all the time. There's merit, recognizing your work. Open development, which we use for everything, really, as much as we possibly can. How we make decision making. Consensus voting, things like that. And of course, communications. And while we're communicating in one way here together, the most normal way that we're communicating together is by I'm doing this and you're doing the same thing on your laptop right now, as I can see some people are doing. So this is a participation part of our talk. I'm not going to choose where we go next. Now, there is an obvious choice, but I'm going to leave the choice up to somebody out in the audience, and preferably not a board member or vice president who's already here. So please, someone, where should we go next? Where do you want to hear about first? Don't make me do a song and dance and tell more dad jokes, because that'll just be embarrassing. Now, there's an obvious choice here. What? Say again? Community. Oh, okay. Well, let's start at the start with community over code. With the pink flamingos, which are one of my favorite animals, besides cats, of course. Community is such a broad term. What do we mean in the context of the Apache Way? So working on independent open source projects where we're working on our laptops, online, in a distributed way, we don't live together. Some of us work together, but most of us don't. We often don't know each other. We've never met the people who we may be working with regularly on a project for years. We've never met them. We only know people through the work on our project, or perhaps at conferences, but that doesn't come very often. So a lot of us also think about it in terms of developing the project and who's merging your PRs. Well, a community includes not just developers, but everybody else around the project, and especially users. This is a part that we often don't think about when we think about the community within a project. But again, this is a new endeavor for societies. We're all working together without knowing each other, which is something that doesn't happen anywhere else. Any company you work at, any business you have, any social group, you end up meeting people. And this is a different kind of community, one that is people you don't know. And we need to communicate differently. So a key early message was from an early Apache Way presentation was no jerks allowed. We can say that. We can say avoid poisonous people. Don't let the blank ruin your project. There are several popular presentations about this. We value the group as a whole. And we're looking to draw in new contributors because that's our lifeblood. So we need to they need to be comfortable coming to us. We don't need the 10 times coder. We don't need the lone jerk who says they can do it all. That's not a good Apache project. In particular, benevolent dictators for life, BDFL, which I spelled correctly this time, BDFL, yes, are not allowed in Apache PMCs. We will not accept a project that has that as their governance model, and we will not allow a single individual to be the leader. We have terminology for, we have the PMC. It's a group. There's a lot to cover in this, but really the immortal words of Bill and Ted from their excellent adventure movie in the US many years back, be excellent to each other. This is important for any kind of community, but it's especially important for Apache. And we do have a code of conduct. The foundation has established one to ensure that we're behaving decently to each other, that we're focusing on the project and not bringing the rest of the world to our project. And the foundation has set that up, and that is required of all of our projects. Some projects go further. They make sort of more expectations known. But the board, if necessary, which has never really happened, would make sure that our projects are being decent to each other. And of course, when everyone is a volunteer, if you're more polite and clear, then other people are more likely to listen to you and help. So wearing your hats is kind of it's not always a good term. It's one that we use a lot that some people may not understand. Wearing your hat is who you're representing when you're speaking. So right now I'm actually representing myself because I wrote the slides myself. But I'm not working for my employer, or I'm working as a volunteer contributing. This is important because we expect committers on projects to work on behalf of the best interest of the project as a whole. So we expect them, as much as they can, to work for the project and not necessarily their corporate employer. Because a lot of our committers work for big software houses. So it may be a polite fiction to say, sort of, take your hat off, and that's not always, it's not a great legal theory at all. But we expect that everyone in the project will evaluate everybody else in the project on their individual merits, on what they've done, not their employer, not their company. So there are a couple important side effects. One is for a corporate team. If you have a team that you want to start working on Apache Airflow altogether, that's great from your perspective. From our perspective, we see 5 different developers, testers, documentation people. They're all individuals. They're not part of your corporate team. You just need to be aware of that because that's important. The side effect for you as an individual is that the merit you build up in a project at Apache stays with you. When you change jobs, you can stay a committer on that project. And that, in fact, many people do that. Many people make that a career. So that's a key part of We're all here as individuals from the Apache perspective. And this is sort of another riff on the same thing. Check your affiliations at the door. So both, we often come from a corporate world where there's an implicit hierarchy. You work for a boss who has a managing director who tells you a direction. That's not how Apache projects work. The PMC as a whole makes decisions. And you need to understand that everybody has a say and a voice, and that part of the reason for that is because then new people feel they might have a say. We want projects to be diverse because they are healthier long term. And quite frankly, a lot of times, the rest of the contributors in some project that you want to convince of your new feature, they don't care which company you work for. They want to know, does it pass the tests? Is it actually faster? So this is a place that is neutral, sort of like the Switzerland of software, we've been called, because we don't do corporate politics. And to make this clear, the ASF enforces independent governance. So in my talk yesterday, we often talk about open source software, which we kind of understand that's licensed. There's 3 levels of open source software. There's open governance, which is a part of many projects, open source projects at Linux Foundation and the Software Freedom Conservancy, and of course at Apache, where the PMC is in charge, not a company, not an individual. But at the ASF, we take this to the next level of open, which is open brands. So while we expect PMCs to work independently and not for a corporation, sometimes problems happen with companies. When that happens, the trademarks associated with that project are owned by the ASF, not by the project itself. So if there is a company, for whatever reason, that tries to abuse one of our projects, we can exert trademark control over that project. And that's a key way that even if some company decides to try to hire most of the PMC members on a specific project for some reason, which might have happened in the past, they can try and get all the influence that way if they want. But if they're not being fair to other contributors, if they're benefiting themselves and not benefiting the project, the board can step in either through the trademark or through our internal structures. So the key lesson here is Apache projects work independently, and we have mechanisms to enforce that. I hate that's a bad word, but that's the key about a community. So we'll go back to our thing. We've covered community. Where would we like to go next? I got to hear what you're saying. Communication. Okay, I like that. I like that. How to write. I say writing because really that's what we do most of the time, but communication is, again, you can't overemphasize this message. Don't be a jerk and avoid the poisonous people. So when we're not talking to each other, when we don't have the social cues, of somebody like me who likes to use their hands a lot and I can smile, there are a lot of nuances that are lost. And sometimes, honestly, because people misunderstand and then we have a conversation like this, and sometimes people are very, very fervent and loud in their belief about something, and then they're like this, and it doesn't matter sometimes what you're doing. So these slides, of course, will be posted afterwards. This is an excellent, it's fairly old, but it's an excellent video about how to avoid poisonous people, ways to deal with people who are in your community but are not being productive for the group. And of course, don't be a jerk, because not only do our projects want to be productive, but they will do something about it, I certainly hope. And if they don't, then the board or the rest of the foundation will do something about it. We have a code of conduct, which is listed here. It's a pretty simple one. We've essentially adopted it from a common one. But ad hominem and inappropriate remarks and things that don't belong in the project list don't belong there. And I guess the one thing here would be, if you're in a PMC that's had issues with individuals or patterns that are, and you keep thinking, those are really inappropriate, then bring them up. The best way to do it is to bring them up on list, politely and neutrally, and just say, hey, this doesn't seem right, to get the conversation started with the community. Sometimes you have a really bad situation Or you have a pattern where each time you've done that, you've started a new flame war because whatever. In that case, the code of conduct has ways, specific ways to report specific issues. Now, it's harder to report a pattern, but if you need help, then look at the code of conduct page, and there are individuals you can contact privately to say, hey, we'd like to make a complaint. Please help us resolve this within our community. So that's out there too. And, you know, none of that would be necessary if we were all kind to each other. And at a place like ApacheCon, where everyone is. I mean, ApacheCon is I love coming to ApacheCon, not just for the friends I meet, but everyone is kind to each other. We help each other out. It's like, hey, you know, I'm kind of wondering how to get involved in this project. Well, I could help you with this, and by the way, here's the person who's on the PMC, but on mailing lists, that doesn't always happen. And sometimes it's for honest reasons with, you know, you don't get the social tone, and sometimes it's because some people are a little bit overbearing. We can't have, I guess a key point is, reminder, we're all here as volunteers. So if you're trying to get something done in your project, then it behooves you, it makes a lot of sense if you make sure that you are kind and open and welcoming when you're saying, hey, I want to do this, can somebody please test it for me? Because nobody's going to want to test it if you say, yo, hey, go get the test done. You said you'd do it. Why not? Nobody's going to respond to that. Being kind is a way to get the rest of the community to help you. So that's should be a self-evident point, but it isn't always. We often do have serious disagreements, but we need to make sure we communicate those disagreements in a focused and polite and respectful way for everyone in the project. And here's a slide that I never like going over this slide because it's sort of a limitation to our current model, but for communication language. So effectively, the core development activity in any Apache project currently needs to be in English. And I know this is disappointing, especially with great strides in especially China, where we have a lot of new incubator projects, where they have both, of course, a different language and some different communication styles. We want to support those as much as we can, but part of how the ASF works is that we are an independent home for projects who want to work our way. And so we have some restrictions. This is one currently. But we can help them out a lot because we provide the backing, we provide community mentoring, we provide trademark support. The way we provide all that support for projects is because we have oversight. We have a PMC that is listed and is elected by merit, who's in charge of our project. Every PMC reports to the board of directors quarterly. Some report monthly. And the board reads every one of those. In fact, the next talk will be about how the board reads every one of those project reports. Every Apache member has the right to at least read all the, of course, public and private communications on projects, because members can help point out issues with our projects. So we ensure that we really are watching over the projects. The only way we can do that is if the board, or at least the majority of the board, can understand your thread. Because if there's a problem in a project, some 2 or 3 directors will go over that project, will review the past 3 months worth of emails on all the lists and say, you know, so-and-so said there's a problem. Okay, well, I can see that, and right, we need to be able to understand that. And more than that, really, the more important point is the community needs to be able to communicate. Right? If you have different parts, some part speaking only in French and some part speaking only in English, they're going to end up diverging in terms of how they manage themselves and what code they add. And we don't have a model yet that can merge that. So unfortunately, the key lesson is development primarily happens in English. If you need a support channel in a native language, we have a number of projects who do that. That's fine. But development, reporting, working with the rest of the organization, currently it needs to be in English. So we will fly off to take a different way. So we've covered number 1 and number 5, so to speak, and we have 3 more choices to go. And I'll take a break while you think. Merit, okay. I think that merits a click. Click. I always find this fun because a pineapple is an old symbol of hospitality where I grew up, so I always like that one. So merit. And I call this merit and not meritocracy because meritocracy has a lot of loaded connotations, which I don't think translate outside Apache. So really, your merit. And to define it, because it often means different things, is in our context, your merit is the value that you as an individual, bring to a specific project. Right, the code you donate, the improvements to documentation you make, the fact that you get the tests run all the time and that helps everybody else. Whatever that actual action is, not just talking about it. And that merit really comes from how the project judges how valuable it is within the context of that project community. So you may say, I run 10,000 tests. Well, if you've just run 10,000 UI tests but haven't run any of the unit tests that the project needs for their next thing, well, that's nice, but it's not as important to the project. So it's really not just, it's certainly not your abilities. It's your actual actions within a project that the project wants, that they need, that they value as a whole. That's what merit is talking about in terms of the Apache Way context. Meritocracy is what we sometimes say, but that has, it's not the same meaning for an Apache project as it often is understood elsewhere. So we're trying to find a new way to describe that. But your merit is something that stays with you. So a key point here is the more things you do that are valued by a specific project, because of course each project has their own set of committers and their own PMC, the more you do, the more you can be recognized, and you may be granted to take more actions. So the steps sort of ladder, in a way, is a user of our software who can report bugs or patches. A contributor is somebody who submits patches, and gets them accepted, who has actually put, work code documentation into the product or into our test suite, whatever. When you do that long enough, you'll be voted in as a committer. So the bold ones here are sort of bigger steps. When you're a committer, you now have write access to that project's repository. So you can directly do work. And in some projects that commit and then review, you can simply check your work in and work with everybody else in the project. The next step is, I don't know, sort of the biggest one is if you've been a committer for a while, or some projects only have a single list of committers and PMC members. They vote you in as both. PMC members are a little bit different, that they vote on releases and that they vote on new committers and PMC members. So they often tend to set the direction of the project, but really a healthy project, everybody can help with that. But the PMC decides when to make releases. So that really sort of gives them the direction setting. And a key, that may seem a little esoteric, a key reason for that is part of our legal shield. So PMCs, project management committees, are in the bylaws of our foundation. So when you make a release, we have to have 3 PMC members plus one. We have a process, how that happens. If for some reason we're ever sued over a release, you won't be sued individually. Somebody can come sue Apache because that is an act of the foundation. We as an organization, this is how we produce software, as an organization. So that's a key part of the legal shield. And as you do more in a project, you may be elected as a PMC chair or a vice president of that project, which really doesn't have any other particular powers. They essentially are the coordinator between the PMC and the board. They write the quarterly board report and bring any questions back. A separate sort of area of merit is an Apache Software Foundation member. Now, these are people who have been elected, who've worked on many projects, have really shown the Apache Way, come spoken at conferences and so on, who get recognized by an existing member and then are elected. There's nobody appointed, and they're never corporations. These are always individuals that we know, often personally. Members can elect the board and can, as I said earlier, at least provide some oversight over all of our projects. And in particular, our members also, they've worked in many projects. They have a sort of broader experience. They often are also the volunteers who help with the board, who help as the president and our fundraising team and our press team. And right, there are a lot of things a lot of services Apache provides as a corporation to our projects that members help either run or at least lead, where we outsource and hire an organization to do them. And of course, the sort of pinnacle of merit would be a director. So again, directors are 9 individuals who are elected by the active membership at large. So somebody earlier this week asked me, if somehow some big company corrupted the board at Apache or bought some seats, and they kept going. And I'm like, they can't. That's impossible. The ASF is designed to be the individual of the membership elect the board. There's no way, if some company came along and started doing that, we would see it. We would flat out reject them. And it was an interesting question because I could not possibly imagine that happening. Apache is designed to be independent. So merit about when you're working in a project. You're always part of a community where we hope everybody is at least accepting everyone's input. So one way to think of it is leaders, not managers. Because, of course, you're not a manager of everyone else or anyone else, unless you're a manager at a company that has employees. So a key way to think of it is merit gets you privileges. So you can commit the code. You can vote on new committers when you're a PMC member. Things that you could do within the scope of the project. But merit does not buy you authority. It doesn't mean you can just say what we're going to do because I've committed the most code to the project. You still need to get buy-in from everyone else. Of course, the more that you have done that the community values, the more respect you get. It's in any human interactions that clearly happens. So obviously, the more people respect you, then they'll probably say, okay, I don't really know if we need that code or not, but I respect your opinion. You've done a great job. Sure, go ahead, put it in. That's fine. So that certainly is a way to help get the rest of the community more likely to help you out. So a cautionary tale are umbrella projects. So we talked a lot about how communities as a whole manage a project, which has some code with it, right? In the past, one of the first ones was Jakarta, which is actually, little trivia fact, Jakarta is now a project at the Eclipse Foundation, which they kindly asked us because our Jakarta was gone long ago. And we said, we haven't done it for a long time. Sure, go ahead. So, branding thing there. Jakarta was an umbrella project with essentially half of the Java stack of the different parts of servlet management and configuration and so on. All these different projects, which had grown organically with Java. That kind of worked and it had a good name, but again, we have these different sets of people within the PMC working on different chunks of code that the person working on the servlet container may not understand or care about the file management. So when I over here ask, can you review my PR, you'll say, I don't really understand that area, I'm not comfortable. If you can't understand the direction of the components or understand, is that really valuable code or not for this project, then it's hard for the PMC to work together. So umbrella projects are something we now have learned to avoid. And usually at this point, most of our projects we've had a number of projects who get so large and then sort of add management consoles and different file system drivers, and they say, okay, this really should spin off to another project because they kind of do their own thing. And if the people working on that can all work together, they can all see each other's merit. And then, of course, recognize newcomers, because I wouldn't recognize a newcomer from the file system because I don't work on it. So that's just a sort of note about our organizational structure. So we will take a different way, and we have 2 topics left. And I'm really curious to see which one is going to get called out next. Open development. Okay. Well, I have a funny story for later. So open development, wide open on the beach. We could all imagine, for those of us who like warm weather, being there. Open development is something that Apache has pioneered, along with a few other early organizations, but we have specific ways we do it. We're a dispersed community, as we most of us know because we've traveled to get here or to Vegas earlier this year. And we're also here as volunteers. Often, most of us are here part-time, sort of if we're thinking about a job. So we use mailing lists. We use asynchronous communication. This is critical because we're dispersed not only in space and in time zones, we're dispersed in motivation and our attention spans, and we only know we only interact through the project. We don't have the other water cooler discussions. So having things on the list and having things spread over time. One of the best ways to do things is to sort of signal what you're going to work on, let people read that, work on the code, check some of it in, give people time to digest what's been sent out so that they can add their feedback. Because often it will be a simple +1, it might be a bug report, or it might be a, hey, we've already done something like that, let's collaborate and make something better. But it's critical that we use mailing lists because one of our rules, of course, is if it didn't happen on list, it didn't happen. Of course, things happen in person, in real life. But when you have an offline meeting, when you have a meetup, right, and get some great feedback from users, or a hackathon where you do some work together, that's great. Bring a description of what happened back to the mailing list. Make sure that before you make decisions, you bring the information back to the list so all the rest of us who weren't there in person have time to give feedback, to give critique, give new ideas. Every project has a user list, a developer list, usually a user list. Every project has a private list, which should be used very rarely. Wherever possible, use the public list. And it's really only a security bug, which obviously we need to be private with, or specific personnel matters, maybe like a code of conduct issue, that we use the private list. Otherwise, they should be very, very, very quiet. And of course, having all these permanently archived lists with the discussion as it happened, that allows newcomers to our project to learn not just who we are today, but how we got here. Because they can see our decision process in a thread. And it doesn't happen all the time, but there are a lot of times where you'll get the aha moment, especially when you bring up a new idea and we say, no, that's not very good, we've already done that. And you're like, but wait, I've got X. We can point you to a mailing list where we say, we've gone through 3 of the 4 things that you think are great ideas and for our project don't work. And you can see, oh, that's why. They already thought of this. Great, they already said this. Ah, they haven't thought of this yet. Okay, great, let's start a new thread. But again, allowing newcomers to learn about our project, whether we're talking to them, whether they're looking at our website, or whether they want to see our discussions, our key points. Transparent projects. So transparent decisions. We're very distributed. We don't know each other's motivations. So even when we work with a coworker in a software company, for example, they're a different person, of course, but we're all a shared team, or maybe we're in 2 teams that are working together. We sort of know where the company's going. For us, we have no idea why somebody else wants a faster file system driver that sorts. It's like, sure, it already sorts okay, but there's no understanding of that. So making sure that when we make decisions, everyone can say what they're trying to do and why they think it's important. And then, of course, have some time for feedback. So I think I said this early in the earlier slide. So the best way to work in terms of proposing new work is to telegraph your intent. Is say, hey, I'm thinking about working on a new file system driver that does this different sorting algorithm. Okay. Draft the design openly. So don't work on it all by yourself until you think it's done. Start the design in the open. Even if you're going to do most of the work, let other people see it. That gives them time to think about it, to digest. And of course, submit your work as you're going. Don't do big code drops. That should be a common lesson by now. And of course, open development at Apache, a key part is a pragmatic license. So all Apache, everything that we give away is licensed under our Apache 2.0 license. And the purpose is maximum user freedom. Or rather, That's how our license is supposed to work, is that we give it away freely. Don't sue us. We have a warranty clause, of course. But we want you to do whatever you want with it. The real purpose is because then anybody can use it for whatever purpose, whatever kind of work they're doing, proprietary, non-proprietary, I don't care. They're more likely to contribute back to us. More people can use our software than, for example, GPL in some cases. The more people that can use our software, the more people who are probably going to end up coming back and fixing things that they need, and they'll just share it with us. And another part of this that's not always obvious for smaller projects, the difference between an individual project or 3 people and a foundation project at Apache is trust in the ASF as a corporation. We've been here for 20 years. And one of our stated goals often has been to be here for the next 50 years. Now think about your companies and marketing plans. When does a company have a 50-year plan? So as long as the ASF is here, all the original source code, all of the history, all of our mailing lists, everything we've ever released as a product, we will maintain on our servers as long as we exist as an organization. And that gives you some assuredness in the future that you'll always be able to get old copies or see what happened. That's something, that's in fact why we have the Apache Attic. When projects get less popular and aren't being developed, then we move them to the attic because we recognize there aren't enough people to keep a real project running, but we're always going to keep the code around. We put it in the attic, we box it up, anybody who wants it, go and take it. But we let you know that we're not supporting it. Well, this actually works out quite well because the next section, ironically enough, is decision making. So one of the early times I've given this talk, I came up to the first slide and said, okay, where should we go? And somebody immediately said, decision making as the first thing to choose, which I thought was kind of obvious in retrospect. So we're here again on our beautiful beach and getting ready to go in for a swim. How do we make decisions as a group? Well, of course, consensus is preferred. There's no perfection in software. So as a developer would say that, you know, if I worked on it, I would never actually finish the software because I could always find something better. Okay? It's just getting better. So we don't necessarily have to have everyone 100% agreed, this is perfect. We just have to have consensus. Is it good enough? Does it pass the tests? Does it not slow the product down? Key reason is, one, this helps make decisions work faster because we get enough input. And then we're like, okay, you know, I'm not going to complain. And a lot of times, we all work in very different worlds. We have different motivations. Something you're really excited about, I'm like, who cares? It doesn't matter if I don't care about it. You care about it. You care about it. The tests pass. You should be able to do it. We should help everybody add the features they need because that will encourage other contributors to say, hey, I could build my thing inside this project. So sometimes we, of course, can't get to consensus. And here are 2 quotes about voting at Apache. So we have a very specific way to vote with +1s and -1s that I hope many people have heard about. One of these is a good and expected required use of voting, and the other one is something that is necessary. So a voting is a way to record an official consensus. That's required for making software product releases. I think that may be one of the very few places it's required. Because that we can show legally we have as an organization we made the release, not you as the release manager. And that helps with the legal shield. Some projects even don't have votes on committers, new committers even. They simply have a sort of lazy consensus. Somebody says, hey, I think this person's great, here's why. Anybody object? If nobody objects, they let them in. That's okay. But making releases, you must do that. The other thing that is necessary is voting is a shortcut to move consensus forward in a timely manner. Sometimes we have a project where there's a major new module or some change where we spent a while trying to make sure we're all really comfortable, we're all happy with this. That's not working. And it's unfair of some people who maybe don't have enough time to review, or maybe who don't really care about the details but want to argue about it for whatever reason. sometimes a project needs to be able to make a decision and move forward so that all the users can get a new release. In that case, projects should feel free to vote. Some projects vote very rarely. Some projects choose to vote for every major new feature. Whatever works for them is fine. That's a good thing to have both models. Because one of the things we don't have is a maximum time to make a decision. Projects can take as long as they want, or they can decide, we don't have enough consensus, then we're not going to do it in this space. We're just not going to add our code. We're not going to enable a feature. And that's OK. Maybe those people will go and do their own product. We do have minimum times to make most decisions, and it is 72 hours. So if you're calling a vote, we expect you to leave the vote open for at least 72 hours, unless it's a security issue that's a 0-day. But the reason is because then the community has time to provide their input. Right? Most of us have jobs, we have families, we have vacations. So 72 hours at least allows the sort of typical software developer who might have a 3-day weekend time to see the vote and put their input in. Now, of course, you can choose to go longer, and that's sort of a project decision. But we expect projects to wait a certain degree to let everyone have input. Because, of course, in an open source project, we don't have any deadlines. There's no boss or manager or the board. The board certainly is not going to give you a deadline, unless it's a security bug, perhaps. The only deadlines we have are the ones that we agree on together. Now, a great thing a number of projects do is they write project roadmaps together, or they plan a release cadence because their users expect a quarterly release or whatever. And it's great when projects do that because it sets the expectation for the whole community to both understand that's how it should work, to work towards it, and as a way to signal to your users who might become contributors what's expected in the project. So it's great when projects do that kind of work, but it's certainly not required, and plenty of projects get along without it. But the key part here is we're all working here as volunteers with our own reasons for being here. And any way we can make the decision process, make the communication, allow as many people from the community to participate in the work they want to, that makes for both a more efficient project. We get more input, we get more ideas, but it also shows a welcomeness to anybody who's watching us on our public mailing lists. Gives them a sense, hey, if I show up and I have a great idea, but I'm not a committer yet, but I'm like, hey, I have these 3 patches that I think would be great, the newcomer can say, hey, if I bring this over, they're going to listen to me. You know, they might not accept it, but at least they'll listen, they'll review it, and maybe I can become a committer. And that's the long-term point of the Apache Way, is making it easy for newcomers to figure out how to join your project, to actually understand how you work, and then to feel like they might be valued as a contributor if they come join your community. So this is perfect timing because we will go off to questions to answer. So of course, the Apache Way needs your input. My slides are on my website. I have another website that talks about this. I'm happy to accept pull requests. And of course, all the documentation at the ASF is, of course, open source. So committers are welcome to come over to the community development project and help out. Right? If there are better ways we can explain this, if there are great things your project has done that are a little bit different, then let the board know. Let the community development project know, and they can help review it and maybe push that out to other projects, or let other projects know about it. Let's say it that way. But that's all I have, and I'm hoping we have some questions, especially from newcomers. Questions? Anyone? Okay, if we have no questions from newcomers, I will open up questions to any experienced Apache members, because then I know I will get at least one.
Just a curiosity about the attic.
Yep.
If I want to restart a project from the attic. Should it run through the incubator?
It depends. Like any complicated question, it depends. It doesn't need to run through the incubator if you can show, hey, I'm a previous committer and I know somebody else who's a previous committer and this other company wants to work on it. We're going to get going right away. Then, come talk to the attic, talk to community development, and say, hey, we want to restart it. And if you have experienced Apache committers, that may be enough to simply bring it back as a top-level project. If it's just you, then yes, going to the incubator and asking, hey, who else would want to work on this? I have these ideas. Because really the input criteria for having a new project, whether it's through the incubator or bringing back an attic, is do we have 3 trustable PMC members, 3 people on the PMC who can serve, who will watch over the project. And one, because we hope they will be able to collaborate and do work, even if they're busy, right? If you have a little bit of time, 3 of you together could make code work. But fundamentally, if there is a security bug, we need 3 PMC members who are watching the list. And even if they aren't experts, who will say, okay, here's a security bug, we will step up in this emergency to fix it and make a new release. So really, it's the community that we need. Yeah, and just ask. I mean, if you ask on the attic list, somebody can help point you, guide to the next steps. Up in the front.
Hi, I'm Victor, and I am one of the newcomers. So I actually have many questions, but I will start with one and see if I can give other people opportunities. So the first one being, do you have a limit requirement, lower limit requirement for number of PMCs serving on a PMC? Number of PMC members on one PMC, like 3, I can see is a number.
Yes,
but
3 is the minimum.
Okay, so if there's only 3, then all of 3 have to vote yes on like PMC approval required process.
Yes.
Okay.
Then at least we have 3 humans who can do something. That's the key point. I mean, there are certainly plenty of projects that have large PMCs where most people aren't active. We need 3 people who are paying attention. Justin, did you want to do a real quick follow-up on that, or that's good enough? Okay. We got one on the end, and we'll come back. And I'll be here, for the next couple hours. And of course, I'm online, and I will post the slides. They'll be on the conference website and on my own website, Shane's Slides.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Have you had conversation around extending the ASF to areas like China in Chinese or South America in Spanish?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because some of it is in the depth of expertise that we have in the active members, right? The members who help the board, who step up to be different officers behind the scenes, who essentially end up being the mentors who help all of the podlings come through our incubator. And we don't have enough of that breadth who speaks other languages internally. And it's some of that, this knowledge about the Apache Way and how we expect things to happen is hard to disseminate to people who are native speakers. We would love to. I don't know how we're going to get there for a while. What might actually be best is if there were a few people from one region who work together, who at least one of whom was an Apache member. We could work with them to set up their own organization potentially. Because also some of the things, especially in China, it's not just the language. Apparently, the developers love using WeChat. So they will have a detailed development discussion on WeChat, do a code review, figure this out, make the decision, check it in, and that doesn't match with our mailing list expectation. So there are some cultural things I think that the governance needs to start from the culture and then, follow our practices. That makes sense. But that is the thing, yes, we absolutely think about that, and I wish we could do better now, but that would take more work. But we would love to talk about that. Okay, well, we should let the next speaker come on up. And thank you. Thank you to the sound people in the back and the video people and so on. Great.